everybody, it's Dave at Draftbit, and I thought it would be helpful to show you all how I set up query strings when I have an API endpoint that I need to send query string parameters to. So what do I mean by query string and query string parameters? So you've likely seen a URL before in your address bar of your browser like this, and here's kind of like a breakdown of the different parts of this. You're most familiar with this first part, the URL, but you've probably also seen a question mark in there and then some other stuff and an equal sign and all that. So everything after this question mark is the query string. And basically it allows you to pass a parameter and a value to your backend and then be able to act on that data from your backend. So in this case, parameter name here, the first parameter could be name, ID, in anything. A lot of times it's a field in your database, but it could also be something like filter or anything like that. And then you have an equal sign, and then after that you send the value, and then between each set of these key value pairs, you have a query string separator, which is the ampersand. And you can string as many of those as you want. So in a query string, there's always one single question mark, and that's at the end of the URL, and it begins the query string. And then after that, you can have n number of name and value pairs separated by the query string separator, which is again an ampersand. And I can show you an example of this real quick in Draftbit here. In this in the URL up here, if you look, this is got the same elements. We use the URL here, and then we've got the question mark, and we have a C equals, and then we have an ID, and then a V equals web view. So you can see how that's used here. We're actually passing this component ID to the backend, and then we're also passing in the view, which is the web preview. So if you're interested in a little bit more on how query strings work and the structure and things like URL encoding, definitely check out the stuff in Wiki and obviously anywhere else online. But we can use some built-in JavaScript methods on the web APIs to actually manipulate these and make it a little bit cleaner to use in some cases in Draftbit. So you can see when I scroll down here to these methods for URL search params, it gives us some things like append, which appends a specific key value pair as a new search parameter. And you can also do things like for each and get the entries to iterate over all the different key value pairs. So let me show you how we can set this up. I have a connection here to an API, just a test API, and I've got an endpoint get people. It's set to get, and it's going to get many, and I have a person set as the object role. And then here I've got this is the end of my URL. So this would be the endpoint, what we would call the endpoint. And then here I just have a single variable here for my endpoint. There is another way you can do this. You can put a question mark in here like this, and you can hard code something and say name equals, and then do a parameter here, name, and then you could do and then email equals, and then email. So you could do this, and this might work for your case depending on what you're doing, especially if you just have one single parameter that's never going to change. Then something like this might work for you. But a lot of times you might want to be able to query based on different things. So in order to make it a little bit more dynamic, what I have here is just a single query variable in my endpoint. And for that, I'll just do limit equals 50 for now to give it a default value. And then you can see here when I test and we can see the endpoint, you can see it's put all these different pieces together. It put together the base URL for my connection, and then it put the path after that, the /people, and then that question mark limit equals 50. That's the default value for our query here. Okay, and then you can see it sent me back 50 of these dummy data. So I'm going to save that. And then I'm going to show you how I use that. So if we come here, I've got 3 global functions, and they all use this URL search params. Excuse me. They all use the URL search params. So we've got a start query string, we have an add query param, and then we have an end query string. So let's take a look at this first one, start query string, and you can see literally the only thing it does is return a new instance of URL search params, which is this interface here that we were looking at. All right, so then after that, we've got add query param. This has 3 different parameters that it's receiving. It's got params, which is going to be the params from the previous add query parameter. And then we're passing a name and a value so that we can customize that. Each time that we use this add query parameter function, we can pass it in and make it custom. And then it's returning an object. So what we have here is we're receiving the params, and then we're using this append method that we saw here. If we go down to instance methods again, URL search params dot append, and this allows us to append that key value just like this onto the end. And then we're just returning the params again. So basically we've received the params, we updated the params, and then we're returning the updated params. All right. Then finally, we just have an end query string, and it receives the params again and returns that string with the question mark and all the different key value pairs here. The interface, the URL search params interface, will convert that to a string with all the separators and everything that's needed, the equal signs and all that's done for you. So, all right, so now that we've got those 3 functions, how do we use it? Well, if we go to here to my fetch component that I've got getting the data, you can see here, this is our query variable. This is the variable that we set up in our query string. And here's that default value of limit equals 50. Now, I want to do the limit 100 this time, let's say. So instead of hard coding that in, I'm going to use those functions that we created. And I'm going to come down and find the start query string. And remember, all that does is instantiate that URL search params interface and returns a new instance. Next, we're going to add a query param. And then the name of that query param, again, is going to be limit. And we just type that right in. And then the limit this time is going to be 100. And then once we're done with that, we can say end query string. And then you can see here now, I've got 100 different records here returned. So let's do another one. We've got a bunch of email addresses here. Some are example.org, some are example.net, some example.com. So let's basically filter out all of them except for the example.com. So we'll start over, or I guess we could just update this one. What I wanted to do is say where this, and this is specific to the API that I'm using. So your API is going to have different methods, most likely for filtering and querying. But for this instance, I'm going to say where email equals, and then the value that I'm going to pass to it is example dot. Actually, you know what? I want to make this where email is like. So we'll do that instead. So where email is like example.com. Okay, and you can see here now all the records that have been returned are records with example.com as the email, no example.net, no example.org, or whatever that was, and we can come in here and update that again, example.net this time, and you can see here all this is updated again. And the cool thing about doing it this way is also, if for any reason you need that value to be variable, you can we'll just say field for now. We can say or query value. I'm trying to be more exact about that, but so the query value in this case, we want it to be example.net. We can save that. So now we have query value. And then instead of hard coding this example.net, I can grab that variable, query value. And so now I'm passing whatever that variable is equal to, I'm passing that in. So in this case, it's example.net. But if I came here to my screen variables and update that to example.com, and then come back, take a look, all these email addresses are example.com. Okay, so so we can chain these as well, though. So if, let's say that I want to get all the emails, we'll stick with the email thing, but I also want to get it where, let's see, how about we'll just do where name is like something. So instead of inquiry string here, I'm going to update this and change it back to, or change it to add query param. So we're going to add one more query param after that. And I'll just say where name, like, and then I'll pick a letter or something. Let's see, J-A, or do a combination, that works. Let's see, is there anything? Oh, you know what? I forgot to end my query string. So it's important that you actually end the query string because that's what returns this string. So it looks like we don't have any of these. Let me do limit, and I'll just limit this to 1. So there you go. So here we've combined two different query params, add query params. We've chained them together. So literally what we've done is program Draftbit to work the way we want it to work. I wanted to be able to I wanted to be able to chain these query params all together and not have it in a rigid way in my endpoint, so that I can basically use this anywhere and configure it and be custom. You know, I can send variables to it depending on the page. If I want to return, you know, it's maybe the same data but a different data set, you can do all that here. So anyway, I thought that would be helpful. Hopefully that maybe showed you some cool hints and tips on how to work with Draftbit, and hopefully this method here will be handy. I'll put the code in the post in community and some links to the query string stuff and the URL search params docs on MDN. So, all right, thanks guys. See you next time.